Today is buttonhole day, and you're gonna first need to find your manual. So here's my manual. If you can't find yours, you're gonna have to search it online and just search the model number and see if you can find it. But I'm gonna use my manual and my machine, and we'll get started here doing what it says. So the first thing we start here with is the buttonhole foot that comes with the machine, and with this one it has this little slide on the back side here that you put your button in, and that kind of sets the sizing of the buttonholes that will be made, and it keeps them consistent. So you just want to slide this down onto it like so. Don't squeeze it down too tight. I found that most of the buttonholes tend to be on the smaller side and not allowing enough room for it to open and put the button through. So just pull it down kind of so it holds it in position. So that's step one, is to do that. So step two is I need to choose my buttonhole. My machine has 6 different types of buttonholes, and I'm just going to pick the standard 21 there. It's typical. Then the other thing that we need to do is prep our fabric. So we're going to take our 8-inch sample here. You want to fuse or apply some type of interfacing, whether you based it on or fuse it. I just went ahead and fused on some lightweight visible interfacing I had. Now I want you to fold it in half like so, so that we kind of mimic the front of a shirt with that finished edge there. So if you don't have interfacing, go ahead and just divide it into thirds and fold your fabric into 1/3 and then 2/3, so like that, so you again have the finished edge. But all buttonholes are placed where the fabric has stabilization in it, so whether it's interfacing or something to help stiffen the fabric and support it. You don't ever want to put a buttonhole in a single layer of fabric. It's just too weak and it would just kind of eat up the fabric. So you want to stabilize it with interfacing or whatever stabilizer you have, or if nothing else, just triple fold it. All right, so we're going to crease down the front here, and I want you to come down about 2-3 inches from the top edge, and then you're going to come in 1/2 inch from the finished edge. So I'm going to kind of move down to about 3 inches and then mark right there at 1/2 inch, and just put one little dot with a pencil or chalking pencil or whatever you have. I like to see my dots, so I do that. Some people like to do a little bit bigger one and draw a line, but I don't want to do that. So it came down another 3 inches, come in 1/2 inch, and then give yourself another mark there. So some people do these big X kind of things or lines. I'll show you one on the direction here in a moment, but I like just to do the dot. I kind of am able to line it up that way. I find it hides it underneath the buttonhole, and that works out not worrying about dealing with chalk later. So all the buttonholes are going to sit 1/2 inch from the edge there, and that's pretty standard on all garments and shirts. And then the trick is to always make sure they're horizontal. They're not twisting when they're vertical. So whether you're doing a horizontal one or a vertical one, you don't want them to be off angle like this. You want to keep them nice and straight. And if they're vertical, same thing, we want to be nice and straight down the front edge. So that's probably the toughest thing, is making sure your fabric's in there nice and straight. All right, we're at the machine here, so I'm going to go ahead and slide my button back in here and get my presser foot attached to the machine. That little slide there has a little bar on it that's going to lock right onto the shank of the machine. And then we're going to be about positioning. So I'm going to be positioning that little dot. And again, the directions often just show the line, which does make it a little bit easier if you do what the direction sheet here shows. It makes it a little easier on this machine to line it up to that foot. So I'll go ahead and do it on one of them that way, just so you can kind of see the idea. So for this machine, again, I'm going to use the red line here. That line is going to allow me to line up the line I just drew on my fabric exactly to this. And then I'm going to pull down that little lever in the back. And that lever is a reverse thing, and it has to sit right between these two, the plastic piece in the very back and the metal piece. So it's kind of a little awkward. You got to move things back and forth, and the whole foot's moving and so forth. But once you get it all lined up, lower it down. Again, double check that the reverse is not accidentally being pushed one way or the other, and then make sure it is in the machine nice and perpendicular to where you're going to be stitching it. So I just start stitching. Have that starting thread that sometimes gets tucked up funny, so just stop and at some point give it a clip if you have to. Here, so I get access to it, and just give that a cut out. There we go. Pretty simple. It's going to do the in steps like so. So the first step is just it does a straight line, which lines up that starting point, and then it does the bar tack in the very back, and it's moving forward now at this point, and then it'll reverse, do a straight stitch back, and then stitch down, and then it finishes with the final bar tack, and then it stops on its own. These machines are set so once they're done doing the complete stitch, it'll stop on its own. Pull that out. Clip your threads up. So one thing you can do is put a pin across here, and if you do this book is telling me to do, I'm going to use my seam ripper and open it up with the seam ripper. I personally do not like doing this method. I've seen it go south quite a few times on people. So I've kind of put the seam ripper in, I'm pulling the tip right back up and out, and then I'm going to slice. But I just don't feel like I have the control that when I use my small scissors I have. I've seen people push it in like this and then just slide all the way across, and then, you know, wreck their garment after they've done all this hard work constructing. So I'm going to probably just grab my little sharp scissors, come in here and give it a cut. Also gives it a little smoother cut rather than getting so, I don't know, the fabric the other way is getting kind of torn as opposed to being cut. So another way is just to fold it in half like that, clip it, get your scissors in here and snip up from both directions. But once you've done that, you just want to take your button back out here, and we're going to just slide it through to make sure it fits. And usually it's tight the first time, and then it stretches out a little bit after that, but that's where I told you it's best not to tighten that slide thing if you happen to have that on your machine too tight. And the other thing, whenever you do a button, you need to practice at least one on some scrap of fabric before you even start putting them on the garment. You don't want to have any issues once they've gone on. So they don't come out very easily. It's hard to pick out the threads. They're so tight together that if I had to remove that, it would just make a mess. So it's good to make sure your machine's working well, you're confident with it, and then you can just do them successfully. So I'm going to go ahead and do this second one here in a little fast forward. So this one I'm going to do it the normal way I do it. The typical way I do it, which is just fold it in half, put a little snip so I can get through the fabric, and then work my way up for both edges. I like to open them up this way. It's just the way I've always done it. I know some people even use X-Acto knives to cut them open, but I feel like I'm in good control when I use my scissors. So there you go. You're gonna have 2 buttonholes spaced about 3 inches apart, 1/2 inch in from each edge. Make sure they're going perpendicular to that finished